This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
The Hidden Killers Podcast.
With Tony Bruschi.
We're listening to courtroom audio and specific testimonies from the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. We're now going to listen to FBI forensic tool examiner Douglas Halepaska testifying in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell.
All right, now that the witness is sworn, I just have a couple of questions. Have you reviewed or seen or heard or read any of the trial testimony that's taken place in this case since it started?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll just advise you then, please, as you are testifying, make verbal responses to any questions you're answering and try to avoid talking at the same time as any attorney questioning you so we can keep the record clear. With those ground rules in mind, Ms. Rawlings, if you'd like to inquire on direct, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Douglas Halepaska. That's DouglasHalepaska.
Thank you. Where are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Laboratory Division. I work at Quantico, Virginia, as a forensic examiner in the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit. Forensic examiner in the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit. Sure.
Can you explain what training and expertise you have to work as a physical scientist at the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit?
Okay. The training is essentially on-the-job training. For me, that training lasted a little over 2.5 years. When I first arrived in the unit, I received a lengthy and extensive training syllabus, which outlined a curriculum of study within the discipline of tool mark identification. During that time, I had the opportunity to be under the direct supervision of a senior qualified tool mark examiner. Throughout that training period, I was able to assist this qualified examiner with actual training samples as well as actual evidence samples as well. I was able to tour several firearms, ammunition, and tool manufacturing facilities, which is critical in the training period because it allows for us to actually firsthand see the examination or the manufacture of the tools themselves. Toward the end of the training, I was required to take and pass a series of written, competency, and oral examinations. And once I passed my final oral examinations, I then actually qualified as a firearms and tool marks examiner within the FBI laboratory.
Thank you.
FBI laboratory is...
We are getting a little feedback on that microphone, but we're not able to make adjustments, unfortunately, today. We've had a little bit of a technical issue, and it's supposed to be improved, hopefully, over the noon hour, but we're sort of limited on ability to control that. So,
Could I try to not use the microphone and just project my voice? Would that be?
We still need the microphone to pick up the recording for the record, so maybe you can just actually push the mic a little away from you, potentially.
Okay.
That was a pretty extensive answer. Do you have any other noteworthy information from your CV?
That I'm a member of the Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiner. That's a organization in which professional organization I'm a member of. They provide training. There's a yearly conference, and there's a journal with topics that arrive within the discipline. So that as well.
Thank you. You have been employed at the lab in Quantico for over 13 years now?
That is correct.
Okay. And how is evidence submitted to the lab at Quantico?
The evidence arrives typically FedEx, but there are some hand-delivered evidence.
And once the evidence is received, what happens next?
The evidence arrives in the Evidence Management Unit, the acronym's EMU. They just assure that when the evidence arrives, that the packaging it arrived in is intact. They itemize the evidence, They enter the data from the evidence into a software system called Forensic Advantage. In it, they actually issue a unique identifier for the case, as well as unique identifiers for each piece of evidence. Most importantly, they put together an evidence plan. So there's different disciplines within the laboratory system. So they basically put together an examination plan. And they also deliver the evidence between the different units. So the different disciplines, once they're completed their examinations, they would just drop off that evidence in a particular evidence storage facility, and the evidence management personnel would actually pick it up and deliver it to the next unit.
So what process do you follow when evidence arrives at the firearms tool marks unit?
Okay. That evidence arrives in a drop-off facility, access the pickup facility as well for evidence. Once that arrives, either an examiner or a technician will pick up that evidence. Once that's done, if active examinations do not start, they will actually just place that evidence into a storage facility within the unit itself.
Do you recall what evidence you checked out of the evidence locker in reference to this case?
That would be items 16, 17, and 19.
And what agency did these bones come from?
They came from the Ada County Coroner's Office.
And do you know if there was an agency reference number associated with those bones?
Yes, there was.
Do you remember what that was?
I believe it was 2006-11-61. But if you don't mind, would I check my notes?
Your Honor, may he refresh his recollection to verify that the number is correct?
Well, he can be provided his notes, and then we'll see if the defense has any objection to that.
I believe he has a closed copy of a folder up there that he can reference if that's okay.
Can I take a look at it?
Have you seen it?
I have not.
Okay, yeah, the defense is entitled to review that first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Thomas, there's been a request that the witness be allowed to refresh their recollection using the notes. Is there any objection from the defense?
No objection.
All right, as you do that, Mr. Halepaska, please indicate if you are referring to your notes and don't just read off them, and close the file once you've refreshed your recollection, so you're testifying from memory and not from the notes themselves.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm just on the first page of my laboratory report, page 1 of 4. There's.
Are you reading? Is he reading from the note?
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
I think we just asked not
Yeah,
to read
that's
that.
Yes.
Mr. Halepaska, I had just asked you what the agency number was, and I think you wanted to just verify that your recitation was correct. So if you can just look and then.
Yes, it was 2006-11-61. That's correct.
Thank you. Now let's talk about how you review the evidence and draft a report. Can you explain what you do first?
Okay. There's a couple of terms and definitions I'd like to define. It may take a little while, but okay. The first thing I want to talk about is a tool.
You know, I'm going to ask that a question be asked. It seems like it was a very broad question, and now he's going to go into a narrative, I believe.
All right, I'll sustain that objection if you want to ask a new question, Ms. Rawlings.
So my question was what you do first. So if you could just give the first part of what you do when you're reviewing evidence and drafting your report, and then we can go forward.
The first thing I do is I review the evidence. So I remove the evidence from the evidence packaging, ensuring that the identifiers on that packaging are consistent with those within the forensic advantage system. Once that occurs, I'm actually going to start reviewing that evidence for any kind of tool marks. Once any kind of tool marks are identified, I'm actually going to document that in my notes. There's some worksheets that I add that information to, either imagery or handwritten.
And Mr. Halepaska, I think you mentioned you also use some definitions when you're crafting your notes. What are those?
Okay, so the first one is a tool. So the basic definition of a tool is to gain mechanical advantage over some object. But when the discipline of tool mark identification, a tool can be thought of is when two objects come into forceful contact with each other, and the harder of the two objects is the tool, and the softer the two objects, the tool mark.
Okay, thank you. What do you do next in drafting your report?
When I'm drafting my report, I'm actually taking the information from my notes. The notes are used as reference to the report. The report's generated in Forensic Advantage, the software system for the laboratory, and then I generate the report from those notes.
And what specific items did you look at for your report?
Those would be items 16, 17, and 19.
Did you use something called casting material?
Yes, I did.
Can you explain what item that was and what casting material is?
I believe that was item 106. So anytime material is used from evidence items, it becomes secondary evidence. Casting material is basically a silicone-based compound. It's administered onto a surface as a thick liquid. Once that substance dries, it dries into a rubberized material, and it actually picks up castings of the item itself, the tool marks.
Thank you. And did you explain how you used that material in your analysis, the casting material?
Yes, there was a few items or tool marks on the items that I actually took castings of. So I actually took 5 castings from those evidence items, and that's what became item 106, which was the secondary evidence.
And that is specifically the casting material?
That is correct.
Okay. Does your report go through a review process?
Yes, it does.
Can you explain how that works?
It first goes through a technical review. That's where another qualified firearms and tool mark examiner reviews both my notes as well as my report for technical accuracy. Once that's completed, it goes through an administrative report or administrative review. That's done by another individual. Doesn't necessarily have to be a qualified tool mark examiner, and they're just checking for spelling and grammar accuracy and stuff like that.
And are there any other specific terms that you use when drafting your report that we should know about?
There's a handful of terms I like to define.
Okay.
The first one is, so I talked about a tool within the discipline. So when two objects come into forceful contact with each other, the softer of the two is tool mark. There's 2 types of tool marks. There's impressed and strided. An impressed mark occurs when the force onto an object is perpendicular. So the best way to kind of think about that is whenever you're at the beach, you got a bowling ball, you drop that bowling ball into the sand, you remove that bowling ball, that's your impression. Striated marks occur when both force is applied to an object almost perpendicular to the surface, and it generates striations or essentially scratch marks. Those are the only two types of tool marks that occur. There's two other important terms, class characteristics and individual characteristics.
Okay, what are class characteristics?
Okay, class characteristics are the general or measurable features of a specimen that would indicate a restricted group source or source population. These are design factors and are determined prior to manufacture. So what I'm talking about is tools. The best analogy I can think of right now is if you had two types of screwdrivers, one being a flathead screwdriver. If you were to use that flathead screwdriver to make an impression, that impression would have basically the general shape of a minus sign in mathematics. But it would also have other features. There would be measurable features such as the width of that tool head, as well as the length of it. Now, when I'm talking about the screwdriver, I'm only concerned with the working surface. So basically, that part of the screwdriver that you're using to torque that screw. That's the only part I'm concerned with. That's the part that is manufactured. Other class characteristics are the manufacturing processes that occur on the working surface of that flathead screwdriver. So was that flathead screwdriver made, was it casted? Was it milled? Was it fractured? Finishing processes, grinding, bead blasting, coating. Those are class characteristics. The other kind of screwdriver, a Phillips head, and a press mark from a Phillips head would look like a plus sign. So if I had tool marks that had the general impression of minus and plus, I have two separate source populations. So that is an easy way to think of class characteristics. Individual characteristics, they are the rapid and random imperfections that occur to a tool surface. These occur during the manufacturing process, and they're incidental to the manufacturing process. So the manufacturer does not intend for the working surface of these screwdrivers to have these marks on them. But these marks are what are used to source identify a tool mark back to a particular tool. And there's an examination process I could walk through looking at class characteristics in an individual, or is that?
What is that process, Mr. Halepaska?
Okay, so during the first half, as I told you earlier, I'm focused on documenting those class characteristics into my notes. So what I'm doing is I'm documenting those class characteristics into my notes. That's the first half of the examination process. Once that's done, I take all those different source populations of class characteristics, and I go to the next level of examination, which is the using the comparison microscope. So essentially, it's the microscopic examination of those individual characteristics. The best way to think of a comparison microscope is essentially you have two compound microscopes with an optical bridge, which allows me to look at two separate samples under the same viewing field, under the same magnification. So at that time, I'm actually looking at patterns of similarity between those two samples. And that's what I use to source identify a tool mark back to a particular tool. That's it. That's, in a nutshell, essentially the examination process.
Thank you. Turning your attention to the items you examined in your report, the first item that you examined was numbered 16. Do you remember what that was?
It was a bone.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as States Exhibits 180A through L. And I would note for the record that defense counsel and the court has been provided courtesy copies.
All right.
And Mr. Halepaska, there is water in the pitcher if you need any water.
Thank you.
If I could have just a second with counsel.
Yes. Mr. Thomas, if you'd like to, why don't you walk over here? We'll turn on the white noise. Oh, I'm sorry. We don't have that available, but still, if you walk over here, it's better than over there.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Halepaska, will you take a minute and look at each of those pages, those images? Thank you. Do you recognize those images?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize them?
I recognize them based on some information that I actually wrote on the bone. Anytime I wrote any kind of identifier on the bone, I would write my initials as well as digital boxes and lettering that I've added to the to the photographs.
Okay. And when were these photos taken approximately?
Between the examination period, which I believe was from February of 2021 to October of 2021.
And you mentioned that some of the photographs have marks on them and some appear to have writing on the bones. Did you place those marks on the photographs and the bones?
Yes, I did.
Are these images a true and accurate depiction of the bones that you analyzed?
They are.
And besides the marks that you made on the photographs or the bones, are there any material alterations or deletions to the images?
No, there were not.
Your Honor, I would move for the admission of States Exhibits 180A through L.
Any objection from the defense?
With the explanation of the photographs where he's written on the actual bones and on the photographs, I have no objection to their admission.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. So exhibits 180A through L are all admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I have permission to publish those to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
So, Mr. Halepaska, the first, I know I have a softer voice, so I'm going to place on the Elmo as 180A. Maybe this will be, no, because we want the scale. How about that? Does that work?
That's good.
Okay. All right. And what bone is this?
I believe that's the hip bone or the pelvic region.
Okay. Can you walk us through your analysis of this bone?
Would it be possible for me to clarify a few terms? I'm going to be using repeatedly through all these images.
All right. What terms that you need to clarify that we haven't gone over?
Action type, stabbing action, chopping, and compressive force.
Okay, so what's,
Compressive force.
so I think you said the first one was action type?
Yes.
What is
action
that?
type for a stabbing action, it could be thought of as essentially force that's being generated from the tip of a tool onto a surface. So that energy will be focused on a single point of that tool. A chopping action you could think of as essentially when that energy is being delivered from a bladed tool along the long axis of that cutting surface. Compressive force I use in my report basically just to outline any kind of damage to the bone that I was unable to determine any kind of class characteristics other than the fact that some force was applied onto it.
Okay, and was that all the terms that you needed to clarify?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to miss any. So with regard to Exhibit 180A, I believe there are 4 areas that are kind of outlined on this. Do you have a laser pointer up there with you?
Yes, I do.
Would you like to use it?
I would.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you'd please just walk us through those areas.
Okay, so you can see the bone here, and these are actually the outlines, the digital outline that I drew around the damaged regions, and then I lettered each one of them. So starting with A, that I determined was a cause from a stabbing type action. Over to B here, which was a chopping type action, and then C and D, chopping type action.
Okay. Now turning your attention to State's Exhibit 180B.
If it's possible, could I just focus on the top image? I mean, for now.
All right, so with regard to State's Exhibit 180B, this top image, what does that show?
This is Region A, which I said was caused from a stabbing action. You can see here I've actually written on the bone A, and then next to it is my initials DJH. The illustrations, I have those there essentially to kind of outline the damage that was occurred to the bone.
So this image is a close-up of image, or what was marked as tool mark A in the previous photo. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And the reason I took the close-up image is what I was trying to do is I was trying to document the damage that occurred to the bone. It's a little difficult to see here, but you could actually see some of the bone here has begun to fracture, and the force of the impact came down at a perpendicular angle. So this fracturing that's occurring here has been driven into the bone. The bone actually has a hard layer, and there's a hollow layer inside. So this penetrated that hard layer into the hollow layer, and actually I don't capture it here, but there was damage that was occurred onto the other side of the bone that was occurred from here. What's not captured on the screen is the arrow right here. There's actual radial cracks coming out of the damaged area right here that I was trying to actually document in this photograph.
And what other actions did you take in reviewing or analyzing tool mark A on this hip bone?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, first half of my examination is focused on those class characteristics. The second half, I'm wanting to actually identify those individual characteristics. I was examining it, looking for those individual characteristics. I was unable to locate any. So that's when I decided to use the casting material. Again, this that silicone-based compound, kind of comes with thick liquid. I applied it into the damaged area, allowed it to harden, removed it. I actually did this 2 times, and I was unable to identify any individual characteristics from this damaged area.
Is there a light on here? Because that image is, yeah, I'm trying to make it lighter. Oh, thank you. That bottom image is a little dark. Are you able to see that?
I can.
Okay. And what is that bottom image, if you can describe it for the record?
It is the same image as the one that was at the top. However, it's just more focused. The magnification was increased. It just illustrates the fracturing that occurred and that bone being carried inside the damaged area. So essentially just a magnified version of the first photograph that you saw.
Thank you. Now, looking at State's Exhibit 180C, the top picture, can you describe this for the record?
Right. The damaged area is here. Again, you can see the identifier I gave it, B, my initials, and the arrow is just kind of outlining the fractures that occurred. You can see some of the fracturing of the bone that's occurring. It's being driven downward. This again came from a chopping tap action. The energy of that long axis of that blade is being driven down. This appears to have come from a perpendicular angle. It didn't drive into the all the way through the hard layer of the bone, but right here you can see basically part of the bone, the harder, being driven inside that damaged area. I did take castings from this as well. I took 2 casts trying to identify individual characteristics. From my examination process, I was unable to identify any individual characteristics from this injury.
Did you know anything else is significant with this tool mark identified as B?
No,
Okay. Did you take any other actions in reviewing or analyzing it?
no, I did not.
Okay. And then with regard to the bottom image on State's Exhibit 180C, can you please explain what we are seeing there?
Essentially, it's the same image as the first one, just magnified, so you can actually see the B here. But what I was wanting to illustrate is you could actually see, again, this injury did not pierce through the hard layer of the bone, so you can actually see at the base of that tool mark residual bone fragments that were carried into it. So that was what I was trying to illustrate with that image.
All right, now in State's Exhibit 180D, there are multiple images on this page. So if we can just start at the top, does this contain close-up images of the tool marks you noted as C and D in that very first photograph?
They do.
All right. And why did you take a closer-up picture of the tool marks you identified as C and D?
I was just trying to better capture the damage to document it in these images.
All right. What did you know as significant with these tool marks?
Okay. Looking at the top left image, you can again see how I've labeled them C and D. Again, my initials, DJH. The green arrow, I use it to illustrate that this was a chopping type action, and that the force of this chopping type action, at least in this image, occurred from left to right.
Okay. And when you talk about chopping type actions, are you able to identify the type of tools in any of these marks that we've looked at that leave these?
I wasn't able to identify it to a particular tool, but there were tool types that I was actually able to speculate could have caused these marks that are essentially chopping tap action are terms I would use was consistent with certain types of tools.
And what are those tools?
In this type of chopping tap action, as I have stated in my report, it would be from a bladed tool, such as a cleaver, machete, and I believe a hatchet I used.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you need to note on the top two images?
There is on the top right. Again, you can kind of see my initials right here. So what I did was I just focused inward onto this, onto the damaged area, and you can see this crack occurring right here. It illustrates basically that the force came from this side, and it drove or fractured part of this bone, and it's kind of driving it inside that damaged area. As you may be able to see, this damage cut through the hard layer of the bone, and it actually transferred to the other side of the bone as well. The black arrows here on the right side, they're illustrating basically scallop-shaped surfaces that were found along the tool mark, which indicate to me that there may have been some type of serrated teeth on the blade to produce those. Those are actually easier to see, if we can. So, see right here, this cut or this chopping type action either didn't cut through the hard surface of that bone, but it carried a lot of material into it. You see the black arrow actually pointing out these teeth structures kind of coming out. I believe that bladed tool had some type of serrated teeth on it, kind of like saw teeth, like you see on saw. And as it was being delivered through a chopping type action, caused those to flare up. And then you can see the green arrow here, which indicates that the force came from, at least in the image, from left to right.
Thank you. Now looking at State's Exhibit 180E, the top image on that, what does that show?
I'm sorry, could I clarify one more point from the last image?
Sure, let me grab that one again. The bottom? Do you want the bottom?
The only thing I want to mention is when I went in and I was looking for those individual characteristics, I was unable to find them in either C or D.
Okay. All right, so looking at State's Exhibit 180E, there are two images on this page. The top image, what is that documenting?
This is the same bone, item 16. This is just the back side of the bone.
Okay, and why did you take a a picture of the backside of the bone with these marks on it?
As I mentioned earlier, the tool marks that I identified on the front side, A and D, I said some of that damage was transferred onto the backside. So region A, as I mentioned earlier, that was from a stabbing type action, and that damage transferred through the bone. So that damage actually carried through the two hard layers, and didn't necessarily come out of the bone, but fractured it so that that tool partially pushed that or ejected that material onto the outside of the bone here. Region D.
And Mr. Halepaska, if I can just interrupt, are you able to say what type of tool would make that stab mark identified in Mark A?
I believe it was some type of bladed tool, so like a knife. However, I couldn't preclude other tools that might have some type of pointed edge, because you can imagine even a cleaver, if it's delivered on not the long axis of the blade, but one of the corners, may have been able to produce this. But this is consistent with a bladed tool such as a knife.
And what else did you notice significant on this bone?
That D here, that was that chopping type action that I talked about earlier on the front side. I told you some of that damage was transferred onto the back, and you can actually see how it pierced through both the hard layer of the bone on the other side, traveled through that hollow part of the inside, and then partially out on the outside. And then E was another tool mark that I identified. It is consistent with a chopping type action, and it did appear to have serrated, or was produced from a blade that had serrated tool marks. And the force of the blow, as illustrated here with this green arrow, traveled from left to right.
All right, and the bottom, well, I don't want to change that because the green arrow. The bottom image on State's Exhibit 180E, what is that of?
This is a close-up of E right here, and you can see I actually wrote E in my initials. The green arrow illustrates the direction of the action that occurred, and then right here the black arrows are just illustrating it. You can see these teeth-like structures that are kind of coming out of the bone. Again, most consistently produced with a bladed type tool that has serrated teeth.
Did you take any other actions in reviewing the tool marks A, D, or E?
Yes, I did. I just made observations to identify any individual characteristics if they existed within those tool marks. I was unable to identify any of those individual characteristics.
Okay. Looking at State's Exhibit 180F. What portion of the bone does this depict?
That is an intact portion of the spine.
And why did you take a picture of the mark labeled as, I believe it's labeled as A in Exhibit 180F?
Okay, so this is item 17. So what I did was I just started over the count. So this is A for item 17. The tool mark here is produced from a chopping type action. As the green arrow indicates, the force of the blow, as far as this illustration is concerned, came from the bottom up.
What did you notice significant with this tool mark?
It didn't travel through the hard layer of that bone. It's difficult to see in the image, but this is not a flat surface. This portion of the bone right here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. is kind of coming out. So this portion here is much higher in elevation than this tool mark.
All right, and what other actions did you take in reviewing or analyzing tool mark A on this portion of the spine?
Just that I was trying to identify any individual characteristics within that tool mark, and I was unable to find any.
Okay. And with regard to the bottom image on State's Exhibit 180F, what is that?
It's just the same image, just magnified. And it just illustrates, or you better see that how the tool mark or the tool used didn't pierce that hard layer, and that you can actually see fractures or pieces of the bone that were actually carried into it.
And State's Exhibit 180G. What item was this identified as by your lab?
This was labeled as item 19.
Okay, and what portion of the bone does this depict?
It is the other half of the hip or pelvic region.
So this is a different portion of the hip bone or pelvic region than was identified in item 16, correct?
That is correct.
And can you walk us through your analysis of this bone with the marked areas?
Okay. Would there be some, if we can actually bring down some of that brightness?
Let me see.
We can't, right?
The light off.
Oh.
Does that help?
Yes, that's perfect. So I'll start from the left side here. D is was created from a chopping type action. That damage from the blow actually pierced that hard layer of the bone. Next to it is E. F here, which is kind of difficult to see. You can see it. But what I'm trying to outline here, and you can actually see it, there's a, well, before I go into that, one of the things I wanted to also show you was there was what I believe were soot marks along here. So part of the bone was damaged, I believe, due to fire. But right here, F, you can kind of see these fracturing kind of coming around here, this little region right there. I was unable to find any tool marks, but it did appear that some type of force was applied to it, which I used as compressive force. Force down on it here, perpendicular, kind of driving this fragment downward, but it was still attached to the bone. Over here on the right, G, you can kind of see this outline here. I was unable to identify any types of class characteristics from it, other than the fact that some type of force was applied onto it, and it just drove in there. And in H, right here, in this, all these G, D, and E, if I didn't mention, were from a chopping type action. I'm sorry, G was compressive force, D and E, chopping type action. H, that was from a stabbing type action. You can, it's difficult to see, but you see this little channel here. It appears that something was driven into that, and it caused a channel to occur within that hard surface of the bone.
And with regard to the compression action, are you able to tell what type of tool was used?
No, I was not.
And with the other, I think you said, chopping type actions, are you able to identify what type of tool was used?
Not identify, but tool marks are consistent with. Would it be possible for me to save that when we do the close-up images?
Sure.
I think it would be easier to illustrate.
Absolutely. States Exhibit 180H. There are three images on this page. Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
And with regard to the top photograph, can you just explain that for the record?
You can see the digital box I drew around the tool mark. It kind of looks like a tooth mark, or kind of like a shark's tooth standing up here. The green arrow is based on the top of it. Here's the base. Right here, I actually wrote on the bone A in my initials. What's hard to see in this image is there's more elevation right here. So this occurred from a chopping type action. As the green arrow indicates, it came from the top down. But since this bone was protruding out, had higher elevation, that chopping type action did not cut into the hard layer of that bone. And also I reviewed it for individual characteristics and found none. I believe tools consistent with potentially making this kind of marks would be from a blade tool such as a cleaver, machete, hatchet, or similar type tools.
Did you note anything else as significant with regard to these tool marks on this top photograph?
For B and C, I wasn't able to identify any class characteristics, and I just referred to them as fractures. You can see that the bone, some type of force was occurred onto it, and it actually fractured that bone here as well. It may have occurred from the same impact, but I wasn't able to determine that. And I was unable to determine any kind of tools that would be consistent with making that type of damage.
Thank you. With regard to the bottom images, why did you take a closer up picture of those?
Those are just zoomed in images of B and C, just to better illustrate the fracturing that occurred to the bone. So you can actually see how the bone is cracking and fracturing, and you got bone that's spurring out from that pelvic bone.
What other actions, if any, did you take in reviewing or analyzing these tool marks identified on this bone?
Other than just trying to identify any of those individual characteristics, which I was unable to locate any.
Okay. And then turning to State's Exhibit I. What does that top photo depict?
Okay, so you can see part of my initials here, but just to make sure that I actually wrote on my notes. So that is D, my initials, scribbled, and then the date. But what this image illustrates here is a close-up of damage to region D. As I indicated earlier, it's from a chopping type action. The force of the action occurred, at least in the image, from left to right, kind of coming upward. What this illustrates is you can see the fracturing that's occurring from the bone right here, where basically the force of the blow carried over this portion and underneath this side. It cleaved through the hard layer of that bone.
All right. Did you notice anything else of significance or take any other actions in reviewing or analyzing this tool mark noted as D on this portion of the bone?
I also was looking for the individual characteristics, which I was unable to find any.
Okay. And on the bottom photograph, can you describe that for the record?
Okay. So this is D in its entirety, and next to it is E. Here is F. As you recall, that's the one I said I couldn't find any class characteristics, though some type of force, compressive force, was administered on it at this point which kind of caused it to fracture along this area here. But what I want you to focus on is E right here. It's the same kind of action coming from left to right, a chopping type action. However, there were what appeared to be teeth-like protrusions coming out of it. They're consistent with a chopping top action from a tool with serrated teeth. This one did not pierce through the hard layer of the bone.
And did you take any other actions or find anything else of note in analyzing the tool marks identified as D, E, and F in this photograph?
The only other actions I took was just to try to identify individual characteristics. Was unable to locate any.
Thank you. States Exhibit 180J. And can you walk me through the marks that you have on this larger picture first?
Yes. So this is a G. You can see right here, I've written on the bone, G, my initials. You could kind of see the outline of the impressed mark. As I mentioned earlier, I was unable to associate any class characteristics with it other than some type of compressive force was applied to it to cause this impression to occur. Up here at the top, H, this came from a stabbing type action. This was the one from the first illustration I talked about that a little channel had been formed underneath the hard layer of the bone. You could actually see this is the orifice of it. It is pretty small. I actually hand wrote on it. It's approximately 0.058 of an inch in diameter, so pretty small.
What else did you find noteworthy regarding the tool marks observed on this portion of the hip bone?
I attempted to take a cast, so this was my final cast of the casting material. I applied it, hoping to capture some kind of class, maybe even individual characteristics. I was unable to do that. Can I speak to the other images on the right?
Yes, that's going to be my next question. With regard to the top right photograph, what is this closer image of? So
that is just a closer image of H right here. I just kind of zoomed into it just so you can kind of see. Here's the orifice. The green arrow indicates the force of the blow occurred here, and you can see behind it some of that channel that occurred from underneath that hard portion of the bone. And again, my initials.
Did you take any other actions or find anything else significant with regard to this puncture type mark on the bone?
I did not.
Okay. Regarding the lower image, why did you take a closer image of the tool mark identified, I think, as G in that portion of the hip bone?
I just wanted to illustrate it. It was all the images I took up until that time. It was very difficult to see it in image. So all I did here was I was just casting different lights. And so I just kind of casted a shadow so you're kind of able to better see that outline of that damaged region. So that was my motivation behind actually trying to take that image or taking that image.
Thank you. Did you take any other actions or find anything else worth mentioning in analyzing these tool marks?
No, I did not.
States Exhibit 180K. This appears to be an overview of all three bones that you analyzed. Is that right?
That is correct.
And what's significant in this image?
This is the only image, or one of two images I have for my notes. that illustrate all the bones in an illustration. So it basically provides you the totality of the tool marks that were imparted onto these bones. On the left side, you can see right here I wrote item 19. So this whole bone here is item 19. Item 17 is the portion of the spine. Item 16 is this portion right here. And all I did was I just illustrated in it all the different locations. So tool mark A, B, A, and then of course along here.
And can you point out any of the images that you were able to identify, either class or individual characteristics for the tool marks?
So for any kind of chopping type action, I didn't identify any tools, but I determined tools that are consistent in class characteristics as causing, in this case, a chopping type action. That would be A here, chopping type action. A on item 17, chopping action. D and C, chopping type action, as well as B on item 16. Item 16, A would be from a stabbing type action.
Okay. And then the last image states Exhibit 180L. This is the backside or posterior of the bones that were pictured in this last image. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and what did you find noteworthy with regard to the bones in this picture?
Again, just trying to illustrate the totality of those tool marks. This bone here is item 16. D and A, those are just injuries that transferred from the front side to the back side. So you can actually see part of the bone was being almost ejected from the back side. Same with D. Recall A here was a stabbing action, D chopping. E here was that chopping top action with a serrated tool marks. And then item 17, you can't see the injury from the backside. Item 19, F, that fractured part. So again, you kind of see the outline of the fracture. E and D is from a chopping type action. G was as that compressive force, the one where I was unable to identify any kind of class characteristics, the one I just took the cast of. And then B and C were those fracture type marks, which again I wasn't able to associate with any kind of class characteristics.
Thank you. Can you summarize your findings or give us a nutshell of your findings with regard to the tool mark analysis you performed on these three bones?
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, the examination process goes from class characteristics, generating different types of source populations for the examination portion, so moving into that identification. I was never actually able to go there in order to go to that microscopic examination would require me to have individual characteristics, so I never really got there. So the only thing I was allowed to do or able to do with those class characteristics was basically just outline tools that could have produced those tool marks consistent with. Could we go back to the slide prior? Okay. So, item 16, A, that came from a stabbing type action from a bladed tool such as a knife along the tip. However, I wasn't able to preclude some type of other bladed tool where a portion of a corner of that tool, like a cleaver, may have been used. But again, from a stabbing type action, most consistent with a bladed tool with a tip on it. B, D, and C on item 16 came from a chopping type action. Tools consistent with a chopping type action, consistent with these class characteristics, would be a cleaver, a machete, or a hatchet. Recall some of them actually had what appeared to be serrated teeth marks, or consistent with being created from serrated teeth marks. So some of those chopping type tools may have had serrated type teeth marks on them. A, chopping type action. A with item 17, the portion of the spine. Chopping type action consistent with tools such as cleaver, machete, hatchet. A on item 19, same type of chopping type tools, cleaver, hatchet, machete. And then B right here, I believe was from the fracturing, so no determination could be made, no class characteristics were collected from that.
And Mr. Halepaska, you were not provided any tools in an effort to match the marks to a specific knife or hatchet or cleaver, is that correct?
That's correct. No tools were administered in this case, only the bones. And could I, see the other half, and I'll kind of go through the, yeah.
The posterior or the backside?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Again.
What did you note as significant, or summarize your findings for us with regard to the posterior side, please?
Okay. Again, this is just damage from A, transferred from that stabbing. D, from the chopping. E right here was from a chopping type action, had the serrated teeth marks, again, cleaver, machete, hatchet, or similar type bladed tools. Item 19, I wasn't able to make any determinations for F, G, and then B and C, no class characteristics I was able to obtain from those examinations. E and D, chopping type action, consistent with bladed tools such as cleaver, machete, hatchet, and I believe one of those had perhaps serrated teeth marks in it as well.
All right, Your Honor, may I have just one moment?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Rawlings. Who will conduct cross? Is that you, Mr. Thomas?
I will, Your Honor. Could I have Exhibit 180, the packet?
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Halepaska. How are you?
I'm doing good. Yourself?
Good. You work for the FBI. Are you an FBI agent or an analyst, or what do you call yourself?
I'm not an agent. I'm a physical scientist, forensic examiner.
Okay. And as far as your educational background, are you a doctor, or are you a master's level or bachelor's level?
I have a bachelor's of science, which I received from Texas A&M University in 2001. I'm currently attending the National Intelligence University at Bethesda, Maryland, where I'm pursuing a master's degree in science and technology and intelligence.
Okay. National Intelligence University?
That's correct.
Is that a private university, or is that run by the FBI, or is that... I guess I'm just not familiar with it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It's a federal level university. It's I believe up until very recently, it was run by the Department of Defense.
Okay. And can anybody take classes there, or is it specifically for government agencies?
You have to have a top secret clearance. In order to take
Okay.
classes there, so it's not
for everybody.
Yes, mostly just for federal employees, but there are contractors that work there as well.
Okay. All right. And what are you studying at the National Intelligence University? What kind of things do you study there? Mostly tool marks, or?
No forensics. It's just focused on science and technology, basically emerging technologies. Just studying that, just to be aware of any kind of disruptive technologies that may be coming up that the forensic community might have to actually deal with in the not too distant future.
So computer type stuff or digital type stuff rather than hands-on bones and whatnot?
Nothing concerned with bones. Mostly things like additive manufacturing, which is just a different name for 3D printing.
Oh, okay. All right.
Mr. Thomas, I apologize for the interruption. There's been a request that we take the morning recess at this time.
Perfectly
We're just
okay.
getting started, so
Sure.
why don't we go ahead and do that? We'll be on a recess here for 20 minutes, and then you can continue with your cross. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, please.
All right, we can have the jurors brought in.
All right, please. Jury's off, President County, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. All right, we're going back on the record. Case CR 22-21-1624, State versus Lori Vallow. Mr. Thomas, you can continue with your cross-examination at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe we left off talking about your education and where you were working at the, or going to a master's program at the National Intelligence University. Did you do anything between 2001 and when you started when did you start the National Intelligence University?
That would be August of 2022.
Okay, so last year.
Yes, sir.
Any education between 2001 when you graduated from Texas A&M and 2022?
Other than continuing education with the lab, no other formal education.
Okay. And when you got out of college in 2001, was the FBI your first job?
No, sir, it was not.
Okay. What was your first job out of college?
My first job was at the Texas A&M University in the biochemistry physics department. But unfortunately, a few months after that, I was reactivated into the United States Marine Corps after 9/11.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for your service. What did you do? How long were you in the Marine Corps?
A little over.
I guess after, I'm sorry, I don't mean to stop, but after 2001, when you got out, you were reactivated. Let's talk a little bit about the reactivation. How long were you in the Marine Corps?
Active service, about 1 year, and in a reserve, I think, for another year.
Okay. And so then what did you do after that?
After I completed my service, I went back to Texas A&M, continued working at the university, I believe a year. Then I actually got a job working with the Drug Enforcement Administration in Miami, Florida, as a forensic chemist.
Okay. And that was probably in 2004, 2005?
I worked there for 3 years, so I believe from 2004 to 2007.
Okay. And then what did you do when you got out of the DEA?
I took a job working for the Army at the testing proving ground in Dugway, which is located in Utah. I worked there as a field chemist doing chem warfare chemistry.
Okay. And that's in Tooele, Utah?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And how long were you there?
I worked there for a little over 2 years.
Okay. And so that would have been 2009-ish when you left that?
Yes, sir.
And then where'd you go?
That's when I was offered an opportunity to join the FBI.
Okay. And you've been at the FBI ever since?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so you indicated on direct exam that you did training for about 2.5 years. Is that right?
That is correct.
And was that training specifically on the tool mark portion of your FBI work?
Yes, it was. Part of it is with the firearms aspect, but you can think of a firearm as really nothing more than a collection of tools in order for it to operate. So yes, the entire time I was working on tool marks.
Okay. And you said you were directly supervised by a tool mark examiner. Is that right?
Yes, sir. There, I guess to expand on that, there was actually a training coordinator who was responsible for the entire program, but you're actually every trainee has a mentor, and they just kind of guide you through the process.
Okay. And your mentor was with you the whole 2.5 years?
He was, during the entire 2.5 years, yes, he was training me.
Okay. And so how many other times have you worked since 2009, 2010 area, the last probably 14, 15 years, on bones with knives or machetes or the types of implements that were used in this particular case?
Those are infrequent examinations. They don't occur that often.
Okay. And over the course of your career with the FBI, how many times do you think? Less than 10?
I would say maybe about 5 or 6 times.
5 or 6 times, okay. And does the FBI have I don't know, I guess what I'm thinking is that when somebody brings something in, you have a vast array of tools you can choose from to try to match up what caused an injury. Is that correct, or am I kind of thinking in fantasy land?
No, you're correct. There are different reference collections. So if this case involved firearms, there's a large reference collection that I could use as tools. We have a large tool room that has different reference tools that are available to us. You're correct.
Okay. And so in this particular case, when the bones came in and you were given the task of identifying the tool marks, did you go into that vast collection or different collections of tools to see what may have caused these particular traumas or injuries or marks?
That's correct. I did. The thing about doing the tool marks, it's not just the tools that you're using, but the surface or media you're testing on. So that is correct.
Okay. And so when you're testing on this type of media, you have to know some background, like how many foot-pounds of pressure it would take to cause this particular injury, right?
No, you don't have to actually go that far. The efforts are using the tools available, the reference tools, and different media sources to try to replicate those marks. So in situations like that, I'm just taking the tool and I'm trying to replicate whatever type of tool mark that was created using those reference tools as well as the media which I'm testing it on.
And so what type of reference tools did you use on this particular case?
I used a collection of different types of bladed knives, hatchets, a couple of machetes. It was just a lot of different tools that I used.
And so that's where you came to the conclusion that this was either made by a machete, a hatchet, or a knife?
I didn't. In the report, I specified they were consistent with. So the injuries, or the tool marks that I saw, the types of tool marks were consistent with those types of tools. I do want to specify too that aside from generating a report and testifying in the report, it's also used as a lead source for law enforcement. So it allows them to actually kind of read over those tools and then in their investigation try to locate any tools that are similar to those, which could be submitted or resubmitted to the laboratory for testing.
And so in this particular case, there was testimony that some tools were seized by the FBI, by your agency, and then you indicated on direct examination that none of those tools were actually used in trying to figure out what caused these particular injuries. Is that correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Counsel is testifying to facts, not in evidence, and asking for information that I think there's not an adequate foundation for this witness to answer.
I'll overrule that objection at this time.
So there were tools that were seized. If I could just repeat the question, is that okay?
Yes.
So there were tools that were seized by the FBI and your agency, and you testified that no tools came to you from any other agency or your own agency to test with this particular these particular bones. Is that right?
There were no tools submitted. So the only evidence that was submitted to me were the bones. No tools were actually submitted to the laboratory.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of any tools.
Okay. And did you ask anybody if there were any tools that were seized?
No, I did not.
Okay. Is there any reason why you didn't do that?
No. Since once the report is issued, essentially that case is kind of closed out, and for the laboratory, at least for my unit, you're just moving on to the next examinations and generating those reports as well. So I did not follow up on this case, other than the fact that once that report was issued to the field, then
Who issued the report?
I issued the report.
Okay. But before you issued the report, you didn't go back and say, hey, in order for me to complete my report, I would like to see some sort of, did you gather anything? You didn't ask any of those questions.
No, I did not.
Okay. And you said there's no particular reason why you didn't.
I wasn't aware that there was any tools in the case. I assumed if there were tools in the case, they would have been submitted to the laboratory.
Oh, okay. So it was somewhere down the chain that may have screwed up and not submitting them to you.
Yeah, there were no tools submitted to me. I don't know how that process works.
Okay. And do you think that would have been more helpful to find out maybe if these tools were the ones that made these marks?
It would have been helpful to have tools to analyze in the case. That is correct.
Okay. When these these specific specimens came in, and I call them specimens because my question is, was there any flesh before you got the bones on these specimens?
There were not. It was pretty much just the bone material. There was some dried tissue, but not much.
Okay. So did you, in your analysis, did you assume that whatever cut through to the bone would have gone through skin, tissue, muscle, those kinds of things prior to hitting the bone?
I was aware of that fact.
And is that the assumption you made in making your report?
No, my analyst was just focused on those tool marks on the bone. Essentially, all I'm doing is looking at those tool marks and trying to determine those class characteristics.
Okay. As far as the class characteristics, you're basically saying what type of implement was used to make these particular marks.
Yes, that's correct. The tool marks that were made, or the tool marks that were imparted onto the bones, through my training experience, I was trying to generate those class characteristics and then going through the examination process. But I was not able to make any direct determination other than just tools that are consistent with producing those types of marks.
You indicated that there was possibly some serrated type of a tool, right?
That is correct.
Did you come to a conclusion that it was a serrated tool, or just that it was consistent with a serrated tool?
That the tool marks had consistent marks, that the tool marks had marks that were consistent with being produced from a serrated tool.
Okay. And with that particular injury with the serrated tool, how far apart were these serrated tool marks?
I did not measure those.
Okay.
Essentially, when they were produced, they were adjacent to each other.
Okay. Is there any reason why you didn't measure the width of the teeth on that serrated?
During analysis, it wasn't essential. Had there been a tool that came with the case or was submitted with the bones, then yes, those measurements would have been appropriate.
Okay. One of the things that you indicated in defining the class characteristics, you kind of went through the different things, and then you said something about microscopic characteristics. You recall that?
Yes, the
Okay.
types of tools, yes.
Okay. And so did you put these bones under the microscope and look at the tool marks under the microscope?
I was unable to locate any of those individual characteristics, so I was never actually able to move on to the microscopy part of the examination.
Okay. So is it true that you don't know what caused these marks? You just know that it was something?
That's correct. All I know is the marks are generated by some tool that's consistent in making those marks. But no, I don't know exactly what tool was used.
Okay. And you weren't able to differentiate whether it was a man or a woman who may have done this?
Oh, no, that's not something I could determine from examining the tool marks.
Okay. In examining the tool marks, were you able to identify how much force would have had to have been applied?
No, I did not. That's not something that could be determined from the tool marks.
Okay. Is there someone in your department that you know of at the FBI who could determine how much force would have been applied, and that may have been something to pass this particular piece of evidence on to?
That's not an examination that the laboratory conducts, at least not in the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit.
Okay. Are you part of the, let me put it this way. Is there any interdepartmental discussions as to where to go from when you're done with yours to what we should do next type thing?
That's left essentially up to the case agent. So the case agent for the case, essentially the laboratory, the forensic examinations, that's just kind of one part of the investigative package.
Okay. So, and I don't mean to overgeneralize the FBI or your particular lab, but and tell me if this analogy works for you. I'm kind of making the comparison of me walking into the Home Depot and saying, hey, I need a nut that is, 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and I go ask the guy and he gives me that. And your lab is that specialized where you are basically, you ask me to do something and I do it, and I don't give you any other further information. Is that where we're at?
The laboratory is fortunate that there are a lot of disciplines that exist within the laboratory that are rare in state and local laboratories. I believe the FBI laboratory, makes a lot of effort to try to answer as many questions as possible, but you are limited to the evidence itself. Essentially, for myself and the examination of those tool marks, the examination cannot really go much beyond the tool marks themselves. So I'm not thinking about or analyzing the amount of tissue between the tool and the surface of the bone. I'm just focused on the tool marks on the bone.
The difference between the stabbing tool marks and the chopping tool marks, because that's basically what we have here. We don't have anything else other than stabbing and chopping, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And it looks like you identified one stabbing tool mark and the rest were chopping type tool marks, right?
I was able to determine that those tool marks were consistent with, because identification is a whole different, a source identification basically is when I'm identifying a tool back to a tool mark. No identifications were made in this case. So, yes, from the examinations, two which occurred from a stabbing and the majority of the rest occurred from a chopping action.
Okay. So the chopping and the stabbing, I'm a little confused with what's which is which. So the stabbing would be something with a finite width and length, or at least width. Is that right?
Yes, so the energy that's being transferred from the tool to the surface is focused on a very narrow area, where a chopping type action still force is being applied, but that force is being focused over I think I used the term a long axis of the cutting blade. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, I think so. And so would these injuries be consistent with someone who was sophisticated or unsophisticated? Do you know?
Oh, I couldn't answer that question.
Okay. I don't have any further questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Redirect, Ms. Rawlings.
Mr. Halepaska, two things. I think you were asked whether, I think if the phrase was something caused these marks, but you've identified certain class characteristics. Is that right?
Yes, I made determinations on the type of class characteristics that could cause those tool marks, those injuries.
And what were those again?
You're talking about the tools or the types
tools.
So for the stabbing type action would be a bladed tool like a knife. The chopping type actions, and these are again consistent with a bladed type tool such as a cleaver, a machete, and a hatchet.
Okay.
And then some of those class characteristics did have serrated, or appeared to have serrated teeth on them.
All right. And we talked about stabbing, chopping, and I think previously you talked about compression actions. Are those related to chopping actions?
They could be. It's just that I wasn't able to garner any class characteristics. So in the situations when I used the term compressive force, I knew that some kind of force was applied to those bones, but there were no class characteristics for me to kind of source populate it, like when I talked about the screwdrivers, the flathead and the Phillips. I wasn't able to differentiate with those two tool marks or injured areas that had those compressive forces applied to them.
And based on the tool marks in this case on the bones, if you had been provided specific tools, would you have been able to utilize them in identifying the marks?
I would have been able to make test marks with them, but as you recall, throughout the examination process, I wasn't able to locate any individual characteristics. So I would have been able just to make the same general characteristics, or basically just, I wouldn't be able to identify the tools back to the bones because the bones didn't have those individual characteristics that would have allowed me to, in order to make those source determinations.
I don't have anything further, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rawlings. That will conclude the testimony of this witness then. Thank you for your appearance. Is the witness excused or released from any subpoena?
Yes, he is, Your Honor.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
with Tony Bruschi.
That was FBI forensic tool examiner Douglas Halepaska testifying in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. We have much more courtroom audio for you. Press subscribe so you don't miss any of it right here. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.